This happened to me several months ago during the summer. I had just graduated from high school, but I still didn't have my driver's license yet. I was just a teenage girl who was more focused on finishing my last year of high school than learning to drive anyway. My parents were out of town for the week, so I was supposed to be staying home to watch the house and pets. However, my friend and I had plans to have a sleepover and get smoothies the very day my parents left. I put on my favorite dress, gathered up my purse and my bus pass, and walked on over to the stop. I called my mom to tell her where I would be that night. She of course finished with, "Stay safe." With that, I hung up and made my way to the bus stop nearest to my house. After I boarded the bus, I sat in my seat quietly and texted my friend, very excited about the plans we had made together. The bus was crowded and sticky from the summer heat, but I was way too eager to care about anything like that. A few stops before the one I needed to get off at, a man entered the bus. The man was shaggy, messy, with whitish gray hair and lots of stubble on his chin as well. He was wearing blue hospital scrubs. He shuffled onto the bus, dragging one foot slightly. He then stopped and made direct eye contact with me. It felt like an eternity, locked in a dead gaze with this strange man. Eventually, he looked away and made his way to the seat directly behind me. I just knew he was going to do that the very second we locked eyes. He wasted no time at all putting his hands through the hole between the backrest and the metal bar that lined the head of my seat. His hands dangled behind my neck, and if I tried to lean back in my seat comfortably, I would have been right on them. I could feel his thick, heavy breath circling my neck and shoulders. At the very next stop, I flew out of my current seat and pretended to retrieve one of the bus route pamphlets directly behind the driver. I then sat down in the seat right behind them to escape this creepy man who was still watching me. I pretended to read over the pamphlet, trying not to seem as though I was trying to get away from him. But then, and I knew it was coming, the man moved closer to my new location at the next stop. I could feel his wide eyes boring into me. At this point, though, I had had enough of this song and dance. It was not my stop to get off yet, but I couldn't take this intense stare any longer. This close proximity was agonizing to me. I pulled the yellow cord to signal I wanted to get off. It was only one stop ahead of the one I needed to get off at anyway, so I didn't think it was too inconvenient. I would have only had to walk one more intersection anyway. As the bus driver pulled to a stop, I launched out of my seat and off the bus as fast as I could. And there it was, the feeling I knew would return, the feeling he would just so happen to get off with me. And he did. I walked quickly in the direction of my destination, with a prayer in my head. I had my phone in my hands the entire time, texting my friend. I dialed in 911, and I was ready to hit that call. Suddenly, I heard it, the sound of shuffling and feet scraping against the asphalt. I knew it was coming from the one leg that man dragged as he walked. I turned around only to see him now sprinting at me. He had his arms out toward me and was working extra hard to pick up his limp left leg to catch up to me. His breathing was even more labored and raspy. I ran as fast as I could down that busy street. I was surprised that nobody seemed to notice a young girl being chased by a middle-aged man in a hospital dress. I ran into a nearby shop that sold skateboards and the like. As I burst in, out of breath and panting, the young man working at the register turned to me and asked, "Hi, how are you? Are you okay?" I answered very weakly, "I'm fine, I think, but I'm being chased. Can I please hide here until I can call my friend to come get me?" The man looked shocked at my response. My hands were shaking very hard. He led me over to the back of the store and sat me down. I explained what happened, and he waited with me as I called my friend. Some time passed before she got to me. The man from the bus was nowhere to be found, and we went home together. We were both terrified, looking over our shoulders for the rest of the way home. I still regret not calling the police. I used to work at Pizza Hut when I was in high school. I have a lot of bizarre stories from working there, but this is the one that scared me most. My Pizza Hut was the kind where you could only pick up the food. There was also a wall between the storefront and the kitchen, so if you were in the front of the store, you were pretty much on your own. The store itself was also located in a kind of out-of-the-way dead shopping center. Oh, and it was in Las Vegas too. That should tell you a whole lot about the level of our clientele. For whatever reason, I always seemed to get stuck on the late shift despite being in high school still. So on most weeknights by 10 at night, it would be just me and one other cook in the store, twiddling our thumbs mostly. I would hang out at the front. The cook was usually way at the back of the store out of earshot. One night, I was hanging out behind the counter when I saw this guy walk past. I didn't really think too much of it at first and went back to doing nothing while waiting there for my shift to end. Then though, the door to the store opened. I looked up and realized it was that very same guy who had just walked by. He was tall but also skeletally thin, and there was something not quite right about his eyes. Despite him putting me on edge though, I got up and greeted him and asked him what he'd like to order. Nothing. He just stood there in front of me, staring up at the ceiling and muttering to himself. I was only 17 at the time, and for the most part a good kid despite living in Sin City, so I really didn't know what to make of this situation. Now, knowing more, I would probably chalk it up to being on drugs. Anyway, he was still standing there, vacant expression, and muttering in what sounded like tongues. As abruptly as he had come in, he just spun around and walked right back out the store, not even acknowledging that I existed. I was unnerved, of course, but I shook it off and sat back down. It was getting toward the end of my shift, and I was counting down the minutes when I realized somebody had walked back into the store. I look up. It's the exact same guy. Same creepy eyes, only this time he's holding a phone up to his ear. He was muttering unintelligibly, and I realized he was not actually talking to anyone. Worse, he was staring right at me, super intense and unblinking. At this point, I was starting to get frightened. He would not stop staring at me. I tried to be polite once more and asked if I could help him with anything. He started to slowly walk toward the counter, still staring at me. Then, suddenly, he asked in a perfectly normal voice if his order was now ready. Mentally, I was thinking, what the fuck at this point? I was not really sure how to answer when he'd never actually ordered anything. So, I went with the truth. I very tentatively pointed out to him that he'd never actually ordered anything when he came in the first time. He got this bug-eyed look on his face and lunged toward the counter. I jumped back at this point, and my heart was pounding. This guy was obviously not in the right state of mind. I was afraid he was going to pull out a knife or something and stab me. Just as abruptly as he lunged toward me and tried to grab me, he yelled, "God damn it!" He looked super confused and upset, like he was about to cry. He put his head into his hands and started pulling out his hair. I started to feel slightly bad at this point. I asked as nicely and calmly as I could if maybe he wanted to order something now. His head immediately snapped back up. His expression was now completely blank, and he looked completely deranged. I was now holding still. I was afraid even moving would set him off. Thankfully, though, the door to the store then opened, and a huge man walked in. He looked at this guy kind of confused, realizing something was not quite right with him. The crazy guy looked at him, then looked at me. Then he started backing up until he was out the door. He started walking toward the edge of the storefront, looking at me the entire time. Then he walked past the edge and was suddenly gone. The man who walked in looked at me and asked me what the hell that was. I looked at him and said I had no idea. I thought he was crazy. I tried to shake it off, but of course I was totally on edge for the rest of my shift. When I clocked out that night, I made one of the drivers walk out with me. Then I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as possible. I never did see that dude again, but it was a really weird experience and very unnerving. I'm also not sure what he would have done if that other guy hadn't walked in when he did. I attend a college that's located in one of the poorest cities in Northern California. The campus is a relatively safe space, since the school employs its own Department of Public Safety. After the sun sets, though, it's usually a good call to remain indoors no matter what. That's when the townies come out and tend to wander onto campus. About 2 years ago, I was living in an apartment complex on the main part of campus, and I still didn't have a car yet. It was the end of the fall semester, and I was the last person in my apartment of 3 girls to finish taking finals. This meant I was home alone, since my roommates had already gone home for winter break. I got back from taking my very last exam and followed my usual routine of dejectedly collapsing into bed to cry and sleep off the effects of pulling an all-nighter. When I finally woke up, it was already past 10 p.m., and I was starving. Unfortunately, the student grocery store and cafeteria were closed for the day. I had nothing to eat in the apartment, and no car to get food elsewhere either. I was woefully poking around in the fridge in the hopes I would find something substantial to tide me over until the morning, when I noticed a Domino's coupon someone had stuck to the freezer. My stomach's pathetic cries for sustenance had finally been answered. I very quickly decided there was no shame in ordering a whole pizza plus Santa sticks for myself, because 1, I was ravenous, 2, the completion of finals demanded some sort of celebration, and 3, if anyone happened to ask, I was going to lie and say I was sharing with my friends. Anyway, I eagerly ordered up my feast for 1 and provided the cashier with my address, apartment, and cell number. I typically never give out my number to anyone, but I had ordered delivery from Domino's in the past, and I knew they needed my number to call me once they were outside. Those drivers always got lost navigating through campus. About 20 minutes later, I got the call. My food was here. For reference, it was now very close to midnight, and the campus was pretty much dead since most other students had gone home. The driver told me he was parked in front of a dorm building that was right across the street from my apartment. I hustled out and was going down the stairs when I spotted the delivery guy waiting outside his car with my pizza. At this point, my sense of caution kicked in. I slowed my pace as my brain took in the fact there were no other students around. The lighting was extremely bad in that area, and I was essentially walking right up to a stranger in his car that still had its engine running. As I neared the bottom of the steps, I silently hoped he would cross the street and approach me so I wouldn't have to get near his car. Of course, that didn't happen. I made my way across the street and was finally able to get a good look at him. He was a relatively short Hispanic guy, maybe 5'7" to 5'9". He was in his early 20s, and my nerves were immediately getting bombarded by the creeper vibes he was giving off. I can only compare it to the vibe that you get when you're out clubbing and you suddenly spot the guy lurking in the crowd sporting the slicked back ponytail, sunglasses, oversized shirt, and sagged pants combo, who just so happens to be headed in your direction. I did my best to appear calm and keep the mood light and friendly. He made some comments about how late it was and how no one was around at all. I just signed the receipt as quickly as possible, gave him my thanks and an awkward smile, and hightailed it out of there. I could feel him watching my back as I climbed the stairs back to my place. Once I got back into my apartment, I locked and chained up the door and sat down on the living room couch to calm myself. After a few moments, I shrugged off the situation and reasoned that it was just my paranoia and overactive imagination acting up again. I had just turned on the TV and was about to take my first bite of pizza when I got a text from an unknown number. "You know, you're hella sexy." I connected the dots immediately. I matched the text number to the call I had received earlier from the pizza delivery guy. My initial reaction, of course, was shock, since nothing like that had ever happened to me before. That eventually melted away into laughter and disbelief, though, when I considered my appearance at the time. Like I had mentioned earlier, I had just woken up from my nap after taking the very last of my finals. I was wearing a raggedy pair of sweatpants, a loose sweatshirt, my hair was extremely nappy and tied in a messy ponytail, and my face was greasier than the pizza I was eating. To top it off, I had glasses on too. It was definitely not a pretty picture, much less anything that could come close to resembling hella sexy. The next morning, I got a call from my boyfriend John. I casually told him about this guy and the events that had transpired that previous morning. After sheepishly trying to defend my actions on the basis of poor judgment caused by extreme hunger and promising to never do that sort of thing again, John convinced me I should report it to campus police as a precautionary measure. I gave them a call and an officer stopped by my apartment a few hours later. I relayed my story. He took some pictures of the text message and wrote down the guy's phone number. The officer then told me he could contact the Domino's if I wanted him to, but it would most likely result in the guy's termination. I was still relatively unfazed by the whole situation. I told the officer I just wanted to make sure this creep never did this to any other girls on campus. At the same time though, I didn't really want him to lose his job. The officer then started asking me questions about how I felt after my encounter. Did I feel threatened? Do I feel safe in my apartment with the knowledge he had my phone number and exact address? Well, if I wasn't scared before, I definitely was now, and during the course of my questioning, I broke out in a cold sweat. My traitorous imagination began conjuring up all sort of dastardly situations that all ended in my untimely demise. In the end, I ended up giving the officer the go-ahead to pursue my case and contact the Domino's. About a month later, while I was at home celebrating the holidays, I got a call from my boyfriend. You see, I had left him the keys to my apartment so he could store his bike there and crash in my room while I was away. He told me he had stopped by my place, but he couldn't get in because the keys weren't working. He also said it looked like someone had broken in because there was glass on the floor and a wooden board across my window. I was pretty upset, of course. This was my first time hearing about any of this. I called the school the next day to figure out what the hell happened. Housing transferred my call to the public safety department. The officer I spoke to was only able to tell me that according to their records, a maintenance worker had called them 2 days after I headed home to report my broken window. Public safety had responded by boarding it up and changing the lock when they noticed it had been tampered with. I convinced the officer to let my boyfriend into my apartment so he could check if anything was stolen. Thankfully, nothing was. My gut tells me it was the delivery guy who did it. It was him who tried to pick my lock and then broke my window. It scares me even more now when I consider the fact that nothing had been stolen. My flat-screen TV was right by the window that had been broken, and my boyfriend's fancy road bike was sitting right there in the living room. Why didn't he steal anything? Does that mean his intentions were to break in and get his revenge on me? The girl that had cost him his job. Would this still have happened if I had not given the officer permission to pursue the case? I try not to spend too much time speculating about what his true intentions were, but when I do, it still makes my heart race when I think about what could have happened had I still been in my apartment at that time. This happened a few years back when I was 12 or 13 years old. I'm from the Philippines for reference. It was Sunday afternoon, probably 5 to 6 o'clock, and I was at home with my dad. My mom had left to buy some groceries about 30 minutes ago using her only car. As I was watching videos on YouTube, the doorbell suddenly rang. It rang quite a few times until I'd finally had enough of it. That's when I knew I had to check who was there. Knowing my dad was probably sleeping in the other room, I reluctantly went downstairs to open the door. The thing is, I've dreaded opening the front door for people ever since my grandpa scolded me for opening the door for the mailman in his house. He always lectured me about how dangerous it could be, like I could be snatched up and kidnapped or something. With that thought, I climbed on the sofa, which was 3 feet away from the front door, and pulled the curtains to see who was ringing the doorbell. Note that the window I looked through was surrounded by a tall fence 4 to 5 feet away, so I felt perfectly safe. I found it convenient later on once I talked to him. He had a dark cap on and a blue jumper. He looked pretty normal to me, but also we weren't expecting anyone on this quiet Sunday. I asked the man what his business was, and he replied that he was supposed to deliver a pizza to my address. Excited and a bit confused, thinking my dad had secretly ordered pizza for us, I told him to wait for me to get my dad. I climbed upstairs to my parents' room and saw my dad was sleeping. I woke him up and asked him if he'd ordered a pizza. He replied in a daze that he had not. Disappointed, I went back downstairs to break the news to the delivery guy who'd probably gotten the wrong address. When I got back to the window though, he was long gone. Since I was pretty young back then, I really didn't think much of it until now. Today, I'm pretty certain I was almost kidnapped though. One, it was extremely quiet outside and my bedroom window was open. I didn't hear a motorcycle revving near the house, nor hear one when he left. Two, he just left like that even though I specifically told him to wait. I didn't even get to tell him that we hadn't ordered a pizza. Three, I didn't see a logo for the place he was working for either. The strange thing was that we only had two that were near us, and they both had a distinctive red color. My mom's theory is the guy probably thought I was home alone because our single car was gone, and my dad rarely got out of the house since he was unemployed back then. What probably got him to leave was when I told him to wait for me to get my dad. If not for my grandpa's scolding, I would have totally answered the door and probably not be here sharing this. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western MD, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we had done pretty frequently. At this point, we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at the summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking when I noticed a man just walking around in the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me though was that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt. Not exactly appropriate hiking attire. We decided to set off on the last 2-mile leg of that loop. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut out of the mountain/bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car was. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in a single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turned around to look at her, only to see the same man right behind her, following at an extremely close distance. Immediately, I got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed he didn't have any pack or hiking gear and was not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. A bit more walking, and he continued to get even closer. I said to my friend that I had to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and give him an opportunity to pass us by. Perhaps he was only following closely because he wanted to go faster than we were. She immediately caught on to what I was doing, and we pulled over to the side. He looked very startled. She waved hello and said hi politely. The man just stared at us. That's when I noticed he was carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stood between us, and he passed us by. We waited to give him some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slowed down. We waited for even longer. He got to the furthest part of the trail that had sightlines to us, and he turned around, stopping to look at us. Immediately, we knew something was too wrong about this guy. We didn't want to have to pass him by again. We turned around and walked back up the trail toward the park, with the picnic tables and parking. After a few minutes of walking back up the trail, I looked back, only to see him now following us again. I told my friend to walk even faster. We booked it up the trail and got to the parking lot area we were at before. We started to strategize and wait, deciding we would wait to see if he came all the way back up the trail to the lot. Thankfully, there were people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We were talking about how that could mean he had kept going on the trail and was long gone, or perhaps waiting where it was more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approached them and asked if they'd seen anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They told us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They described the exact man who was following us. We explained our interaction with him to the wife and got into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjected. We need to call a ranger right now. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and he was carving that stick. Needless to say, we called the ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure we got to our car safely. Then they even gave us their numbers, just in case we needed anything. The rangers walked the trail, but there was no sight of the man. I wish I knew where he'd gone and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. I worked as a cocktail waitress when I was 22 years old. My shift was from 5 p.m. until 2 a.m. As a waitress, I'd become fairly used to being harassed. Usually, it wasn't anything too over the top or frightening though. Most customers were regulars who flirted innocently. Just good-natured banter, nothing threatening or in any way sinister at all. Up until this night, I'd never felt a sense of danger from any of the customers I'd waited on. On this particular night, though, everything changed. I was being harassed by a creepy customer I'd never seen before. He'd said such inappropriate things to me that they really creeped me out. He was relentless with them too. At one point, as I was serving his drink, he reached out and put his hand on my ass. After this happened, I never went back to his table again. If he wanted another drink, he'd have to go up to the bar and ask the bartender himself. I was through with waiting on this sinister creep. This happened back in 1978, so it was at a time when I didn't have any recourse when things like this happened. The bartender only made customers leave when they were far too drunk to sit on a bar stool or at a table or booth. Otherwise, we were left on our own to deal with these creepy customers. At closing, the man finally left. Even though he was gone though, I still felt such a sense of unease. I wasn't easily spooked, but this guy had really freaked me out for some reason. There was just something off about him. It took me nearly an hour after closing to complete the work and cleaning I had to do to have the bar ready for the following day. It was about 3 a.m. as I made my way through the dark parking lot to get back to my car. This was an extremely deserted and isolated place at night. The lot had woods that surrounded it entirely. That in and of itself was creepy. As I was about halfway to my car though, out of the very corner of my eye, I saw him. My heart began to pound as I realized he had waited in the lot for me the entire time to come out. I knew in that moment I had to get to the safety of my car, or this man was going to do God knows what to me. I was young and fit, thankfully, whereas this man was in his late 40s and overweight. My thoughts were quickly assessing my situation. I really didn't want to be kidnapped and murdered. This was the scenario I envisioned if this man got to me before I could get to my car. I knew I had to make a run for it, so I ran as fast as possible. I jumped inside the car and locked the door immediately. It wasn't one moment too soon either, because this man was now at my driver's side window, demanding I roll it down. He kept yelling he didn't want to hurt me. He only wanted to talk. He began to pound on my window as I fumbled with my keys to try and get the hell out of there. I began to fear he'd shatter my window entirely and get his hands on me. Finally, I got my car started. As I put my car into reverse and backed out, he began to scream bloody murder. He was yelling for me to stop because apparently I'd run over his foot. My gut instinct, though, told me this man was faking the injury to get me out of my car. I was not going to get out for any reason. I drove home as fast as I could. Once home, I called the police. They came to take my report and get my description of the guy. At this point, I wasn't really certain about whether I had injured him or not. I explained all of this to the officer. The police sent another officer to the parking lot to see if he was still there and suffering from an injury. He wasn't there at all. Nobody called the police to report a hit and run either. The police told me I'd done the right thing by not falling for that ruse. I called my boss the following day and told him I would not be returning to work there. I'd never been so frightened by anyone before. It was a night in which I truly feared for my life. There was no way I could make myself return to that job. That night still haunts my dreams.
Good evening all, and welcome. For all of you home alone tonight, I hope you don't get spooked too badly. Surely, you are truly alone. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My girlfriend and I had been living in our new apartment approximately 3 to 4 months at the time of this story. For clarification and background, we live in a basement level unit. The one and only entrance is inside the building and down the stairs. However, there's 4 windows facing nothing but a row of shrubbery and tree line. It was roughly 9 to 10 p.m. and she was at work for the evening. I had the place to myself, lights on and TV blasting. I was sitting in the living room, planning on eating trashy and binge-watching the remaining episodes of Broad City. Not long into it, however, I heard a scraping sound from the bathroom. My first thought? A mouse, which was the last thing we needed. So I get up and make my way through the hallway as quietly as I can to catch a glimpse of it. The closer I got, the more I realized the scratching wasn't coming from the bathroom, but rather the window of the master bedroom. My next guess was it was simply kids playing outside, as they tend to, or the bunny I had seen bouncing out there that morning. Even more likely, someone taking a dog out to pee. I paused, tried to hone my hearing, and only then noticed it wasn't a sound echoing from outside, but rather scratching on the window itself. I started entering my bedroom when I noticed the sound stopped and moved to the adjacent window in the room next to it. A smaller bedroom that gave us the creeps as it is. We never used it, and there was no light source. It simply sits dark and empty aside from a few boxes of my clothing. Now, thinking back, it was probably a bad idea. I'm a small girl, maybe 5'2", 90 pounds and soaking wet. But I do have a bit of a spirit and tad bad temper. I had hoped, upon being discovered, that whoever it was, obviously to me, now that was more of a someone and not a thing, would run off. I had caught them red-handed. So I steeled myself and yelled out, "I hear you. What do you want?" The scratching stopped instantly. I waited. After what felt like an eternity, I assumed the coast was clear. I made my way to the windowsill and slowly cracked open the blinds. I don't know why I did. Because there he was crouched, peering into me with the widest and wildest eyes I've ever seen on a person, most certainly strung out on something. He told me to let him in. As shocked as I was, I almost laughed at the audacity, as if I was just going to swing open the window and let him waltz in. Using the remaining courage I had mustered, I tell him so not gently, "Get the hell away from my house." He again told me to let him in, to which I informed him that I was calling the police, and hurriedly proceeded to do just that. I even turned the phone to face him for added effect, hoping this would scare or intimidating him. Anything to get this man to leave. Unfortunately, it had the exact opposite effect. He was seething, raging, and practically foaming at the mouth. He drew back and punched the window hard, repeatedly slamming his fists and palms against the glass. The window started cracking, blood flinging up like a gore-filmed movie effect. I was out of there fast, heart racing, slamming the door shut behind me, so tempted to run out the front door, but incredibly scared that he would just come around to the front of the building. It would take no time at all for him to do so. Torn and trapped, I picked up the nearest blunt object and placed it between myself and in between the 2 doors. I figured whichever one moved first, I'd go out the other. I still had the phone to my ear, urging the 911 operator to get someone here fast. In my panicked state, I also feared for my girlfriend, who would usually be coming home soon. I messaged her, warning her about what was going on. Eventually, sirens and a pounding came to the front door. The police arrived. I explained what had happened, and they searched the apartment and area near the window, coming back with a set of keys that he had possibly dropped, but no sign of him, other than the broken window. They took a sample from the blood splatter that was left on the glass. My girlfriend came home after, having left work early and calling the police herself. I'm grateful she did. Maintenance had been notified, and they threw up temporary boarding until it could be repaired. They never actually found the guy. Or if they did, I didn't receive any updates about it. Definitely didn't get any sleep that night though. This summer, I went with a friend, both of us are females aged 21, to my grandparents' house in Spain. She had just finished college, so was looking for a summer job there, and I had overdue work for college, which I had to do over the summer. In the following weeks, she couldn't get a job, so she decided to go back home. But my parents were going to be flying over in 2 weeks' time, and my siblings and cousins would be following down a few weeks after. I decided to stay on and wait for them, and not cut my own holiday short. I was getting used to being a complete hermit, as I didn't know anyone there and couldn't speak the primary language. The only human contact I had was when I went down to the local supermarket. I went down to pick up my groceries one day, and after 10 days into a fortnight of loneliness, as I'm walking down an aisle, this guy walks by and says, "Hola." Now, I thought he must be talking to someone else, or I misheard him, but I noticed him glancing over at me every now and then. When I had picked up all my groceries, I went to the register to pay, and who was in front of me but the same man, who turned around and gestured for me to go ahead of him. I smiled, thanked him, and went ahead. Every time I glanced back at him, his eyes were focused on me, unmoving, which kept making me look awkwardly away. After finishing the transaction, I left and went to make the 4-minute walk back home. Feeling a bit creeped out, lo and behold, as I'm walking past the neighbor's house, this car stops beside me. The window goes down, and there's the guy again, who starts speaking to me in Spanish and gesturing for me to get into his car. As I don't speak Spanish, I assume he was offering me a lift home, and I try and communicate to him that I'm nearly done home, but he keeps going on and on in fast-paced Spanish, even though I clearly haven't got a clue what he's saying. After a few more, "No gracias, no gracias," he finally drives off, and I wait to resume walking, as I don't want this random guy to know exactly which house I live in. Now I have to explain that the house I live in has a 6-foot wall along the whole perimeter, broken up by a front door to the front garden, and a sliding door for the car, to come in and out of the road. Around the house, there are about 8 motion sensor lights, and there were bars on all the windows and patio doors. The following night at 3 a.m., I get woken up to the motion sensor lights going off outside my front door, which was the bedroom I was facing. Now, this wasn't abnormal. It could have been any number of bugs, lizards, cats, but what quickly followed was the motion sensor light outside my room going on, and I could hear footsteps. Definitely not that of an animal. I was frozen there in panic, listening for any more noises as the light turned off outside my room. I lay there, hearing only my heart drumming in my head, until the same thing happened again about a minute later. reconfirming that it actually was someone's footsteps outside. After that, I lay awake for the rest of the night in total silence, not moving. But I didn't hear anyone else. Once it became light enough outside, I got out of bed and waited until it wasn't an ungodly time to call my parents back home, who in turn contacted some friends of my grandparents in Spain, and I stayed with them for the final 3 nights before my grandparents flew over again. I'm thankful that there were bars on nearly every opening in the house, but I don't think I'll ever be able to stay home alone there again. This happened when I was 9 or 10. My parents rarely left me home alone, but when they do, it's mostly because they've got adult stuff, like going on for a relative's funeral ceremony, visiting a hospital, or something like that they don't want to bring me to, because they're scared that I will act awkwardly, and they're right. So it was the case when they let me on my own in that gloomy evening that scarred me for life. They told me that they'll be back for dinner, but in case, my mum prepared some spaghetti and told me to eat it and go to bed if they weren't coming after 8:30 p.m. They had the door keys and begged me to not lock it from the inside so that they can unlock the door without my help. As soon as they left at around 6:30, I began to do my homework, to get rid of them so that I could play video games for 2 hours straight. I was really into my game and I barely checked the time, but when I did, it was already 8 p.m, and that's when my nightmares started. So I paused the game and reheat my spaghetti in the microwave when I heard the interphone. I live in an apartment on the 5th floor, and in order to unlock the main door on the ground floor, we had to use that interphone. You could unlock the main door with the keys, but my dad told me they'll still call me with the interphone to make sure I was sleeping or not. I answered the call, presuming it was my parents. I say hello, but no answer. Then I continue with, "Okay, it's unlocked now." Still no answer. It felt strange to me, because they will always say something before coming in, but I thought they were really just in a hurry to see me. How naive was I? Things got worse. After waiting for 15 minutes, I started to realize that it wasn't my parents at the interphone, because I was living on the 5th floor, and it certainly doesn't take 15 minutes to get the elevator, or even to climb up the stairs. So I just unlocked some random stranger. But I felt like, no big deal, because no way in hell is that stranger gonna guess in which floor I was living. You saw that coming, huh? Well, I didn't. Someone started ringing the doorbell 20 minutes after I answered the interphone. I knew it wasn't my parents, because not only was the person ringing the doorbell in the most horrendous way possible, but he was also knocking on the door. Things that my parents wouldn't do, because they have the freaking key. I was sweating, and I started to switch off all the lights, and I took a kitchen knife with me, even though I have no idea who this person is, as I was too scared to look into the keyhole. I knew that person wasn't welcome in my home. Then the guy says, "I know there's someone here. No need to be scared. I'm the hallway cleaner. I just want some water, I'm thirsty." At that point, I was about to call my parents so they could come and beat him, but the phone was in my room, and if I move, I'll make a noise. Stupid wooden freaking creaking floors. So I stayed next to the main door in the dark, sweating, kitchen knife in hand. He was still trying to convince me to open the door with his same, "I'm exhausted, I'm thirsty" strategy. But I knew he was lying. 1. Why ask for water when there's a fountain on the ground floor? And 2, I was pretty sure that he was the person at the interphone. That's why he said, I know there's someone here, because I freaking answered him at the interphone. But how the hell did he find out which floor I was living on? That's still a mystery. Was he spying on me? Did he know where my parents lived? Did he kill them and take the keys? Little me was getting paranoid, and tears began falling down my cheeks. But after what seemed like an eternity, he finally left his last words, and they're still fresh in my memory. "You're not a very polite little girl," and his footsteps faded away from the door. Even if he was gone for good, I sat down next to the door and cried. I was 9 to 10 at the time, and I managed to pull myself together, wipe off my tears, and waited for my parents. When they arrived, I hugged them, and they kind of scolded me for not being asleep yet, so I didn't tell them what happened. I was scared they'd scold me more and forbid me from going to my pajama parties. I was even more stupid at that age. The whole week after, I kept an eye on the cleaning staff in the building, and yet I've never met a male hallway cleaner. P.S. I told my family about this little incident during Christmas dinner. Didn't mention all the details, but they were very surprised that I hadn't said anything to them after all these years. We even had a nervous laughter after I said that I took the kitchen knife to defend myself. I never thought that I could laugh at that incident before. As for the mystery, it still remains a mystery. But we all discussed about this case, and the more plausible scenario is that the intruder is actually one of our neighbours, because there was no other way to find in which floor and door I was in. My parents are very friendly, so they usually talk a lot with the neighbours. I even remember that my dad used to bring me with him while visiting his neighbours' friends, because they were around the same age and had the same kids to play with. So the fact that they were out that evening probably hit the ears of the neighbours. Anyway, we got a lot of fun resolving that mystery, and I feel much more relieved now. The heavy dark secret that I was holding is finally gone. I was 17 and lived with my parents in a very remote location in a small town in the middle of a forest. There were no neighbours, just forest. At some point in September, these flashlights start appearing, and they are pointing at our windows. Sometimes it was 2, but mostly just one of them. We never bothered the police or anyone with it, because we thought it was just some kids or some guy who has nothing else to do. And they never really touched anything, just flashed our windows and knocked on them. It was definitely creepy, but after a few weeks of going outside and even waiting for them to appear, they were never there. We got so used to it. They weren't like regular. Sometimes they were for a couple of days or weeks between. This encounter happened just a few days after Christmas. My parents were visiting relatives, and I was doing whatever teenage boys do when they have the house to themselves and no friends. At like 11 p.m, I decided to go shower. Now our shower was in a separate building, so I had to walk across the yard to get into the shower. Nothing out of the ordinary happens there, but as I'm walking across the yard, just with a towel on me, I hear a man behind me say, "You know, I can catch you if you run." At that point I wanted to cry for mother, but I kept walking like I hadn't even noticed the guy. The door was unlocked since I was too lazy to carry keys, and I just slammed the door behind me and lock it. Grab a knife from the lobby, as our house was littered with them since they are always needed and missing, and go through the house checking every single possible hiding spot. Luckily, there's no one there. After that incident, there were no more flashing lights or anything creepy. I didn't call the police, but I informed them, and I never got to know why he was just standing there creeping me out. He clearly wasn't there for anything violent. Or was he? I'm a 6'7" tall guy, and I'm definitely not the first choice as a victim, but I did have very long hair, so maybe he thought I was a girl or something. Whatever the case, I hope to never meet again. My mother's best friend in another state surprised her by saying she would personally pay for a plane ticket to come out and see her as a special birthday treat. After getting an okay from the doctor, saying that she was good enough to travel, my mum packed her bags. When you're in your late 50s and never see your friends, you jump at the chance to see them. So for 2 weeks, my mum was going to be in another state, visiting a friend, allowing me to have the house to myself for the entire time. Unlike some girls, I did not throw parties or have friends over. Really, I just went to work, came home after, and relaxed. I had been staying by myself for years. When I did live on a college campus, my roommate almost never slept in our room. And before that, as a teenager, I was often home alone overnight for many reasons. Also, I am no delicate wallflower. I'm not so petite, but I'm not overweight. Honestly, I'm an average build, but I could probably knock down someone if I needed to. So after my mum had left for the 2 weeks, life went on as normal. For 3 days I continued as normal, but by the end of the first week alone, I had really only left my house to go to work or to go to the grocery store. But at the beginning of the second week is when I felt uneasy. I'm not easily frightened, so this unease was foreign to me. While I had not invited people over, I did go to a friend's house. She and I just wanted to hang out, binge on junk food and watch horror movies, and gossip about lame bullshit as we were still teenagers. I went home around midnight, so it was very dark when I pulled into my driveway. I should mention that my house is practically in the middle of nowhere, and my nearest neighbour is at least a mile away. And to make matters worse, we have an outdoor light that automatically kicks on when it's dark outside, like a city streetlight actually. Well, ever since Mum went on her trip, the light began to flicker, and when I'd look outside in the night, I would sometimes see pitch black. Anyway, midnight, and it was my dumbass that ignored the light outside being very flickery. It was practically off, only giving me faint glimmers of light to show me the door. I just used the flashlight on my phone, turning off the flashlight when I was on my porch, so I stood in darkness. No porch light or anything were on. When I stepped onto my porch to unlock the door, I heard the cat meowing. Mum and I are allergic to cats, so we can't keep one inside of the house. Why we don't just bite the bullet and take an allergy pill? I don't know. But the cat was perched in the porch swing as usual, as I could tell by her meow's direction. She also hissed at me, or something in the dark. Damn pole light, why didn't it work? I passed my cat's hissing off as her being a drama queen, and head inside. Now this is where I stop stalling and say what happened. By coincidence, one of the movies my friends and I were watching was called Psycho. You know, crazy dude with a mummy complex in a motel killing people, with the infamous shower scene. And who can forget Norman Bates' stare at the end of the film? His eyes. His evil eyes. Just after walking through my front door, I felt weird, like I had done something stupid. Chills ran down my arm and through the back of my neck without explanation. I swore that just after I closed my front door and locked it, I heard a crunch. A crunch like a person eating cereal. I shrugged it off and proceeded to get my ass into bed, and that was it. The next night I got home late again, this time from work. I had been given the task of locking up the gas station before coming home. It was around midnight again, and I came home this time to complete darkness. Only the car's headlights shined my way. Hastily, in the black of night before my lights automatically kicked off, I ran into my door and let myself in the house. There was the sound again. My cat hissed, following by crunching. Let me remind you, and think of this. It's pitch black. Outside of my field of light, I see nothing, and I'm going off what I assume there is. That night, after going to bed, I wake up to the sound of something falling out on the porch. The sound was so loud it penetrated the walls of my house. I live in a one-story home, so the sound had not to travel far. My bedroom is in the middle of the house, like the exact center. I was startled by the sound. It was 2 a.m. At first I thought it was the cat playing outside. She's weird. Curious, I got up to investigate. There I was, wearing random clothes to sleep, my hair in a ponytail, my phone at 50% charge, at my most vulnerable in a half-asleep daze. I peer around the corner of the hallway and look out our doorway. Our front door is one of those doors with a big window on it, so you could see outside pretty darned easily. The light outside was working again, but I wish it hadn't. I reference Norman Bates as a sign of, what is the word? Irony, given I had seen Psycho recently. Now illuminated by the outdoor light, standing on my front porch, holding my cat, was a man. He was tall, skinny, surprisingly well dressed, and holding my freaking cat in one arm. In the other, struck my curiosity more. He held a spoon. My cat looked like she wanted nothing to do with him, but he was so content holding her in one arm and a spoon in the other. I stand frozen behind the wall, my eyes barely seeing him, as I swear I start to zone out. This is what fear feels like. It isn't fun. We have an automatic cat feeder on our front porch. Simple thing. You fill the back with food, and at certain times it dispenses just enough for the kitty to eat at scheduled meal times. This man had opened up the compartment of the feeder and dipped his spoon inside like it was a bowl of cornflakes. He proceeded to eat the cat food slowly, and I could see my cat fidgeting with him. I could even hear him hissing, like she had before. Wait! More on that in a moment. He's not doing anything, mind you, just holding my cat at 2 a.m, eating the cat food, and not moving a single muscle. But I was frozen in fear, because a stranger doing anything on my property this late, when I or anyone is alone, is going to freak someone out. I prayed to God that he would just eat his snacks and leave. But no. He closed the compartment after getting a big spoonful of cat chow and sat on the porch swing where my cat liked to sleep. He then let her go free. My cat just wandered around the porch, immediately going to the opposite side. The man just sat there. In true Norman Bates fashion, he twisted his face into a satisfactory grin, similar to Norman's face, the one he makes at the end of the film, claiming he would never hurt a fly. Yeah, if you've seen that scene, you know what I mean. Chilling. It was at this moment I sneezed. I sneezed pretty loud too. So loud that I stand there behind the corner, barely poking out my head, and the man hears me. He turns his still grinning face to me. Oh shit. He can see me. He can see me, and he knows where I'm standing right now. Not even 20 feet away. His facial expression didn't change. He just grinned and grinned and grinned and licked his lips as if he was so satisfied with his meal. Sicko freak. I immediately began to cry. I was scared of this creep, and he hadn't even appeared to pose a threat. I got every bad feeling from him. I knew the door was locked when I started to pick my phone up to call the police. But he saw the phone, came up and shook his head. No. Then he spoke. Do not do that, was all he said. At that point I started sobbing, forgetting to breathe and practically dry heaving. I may have overreacted, but I was petrified. Other reactions be damned. Nobody can tell you you shouldn't feel scared when you're truly scared. the man just stood up, still grinning, waved goodbye, and walked off my porch. By sheer coincidence, the light outside flickered just as he was out of sight. After sobbing from more fright, I collected myself enough to call the police, and my mother, and my friends, my cousin, and everyone I knew right then and there. I balled up on the floor, in tears. For all I knew, I was only helping people know I was going to die, and they should come ASAP to get the killer. But instead of finding me dead, the police arrived to a scared girl in her hallway, panicking, sobbing, and horrified. The police did not believe my story. They did not find him, no matter how many lights they used, or if the outside light came on for more than a few minutes. They could not find him. Just some psycho with a thing for cat food. Maybe it's funny, but to me it's not. I felt terrified from this man. I asked my friends and one of my cousins to come and stay with me the day after. Actually, the very same night. My friend who I'd visited the day prior came over. I called work and asked for the remainder of the week off. Nobody left me home alone until Mum returned. Normally I care for her, but when she returned, she was taking care for me, and I cried for days. Maybe nothing really happened, but I was scared shitless. We brought the cat inside, so no more midnight snacks for the freak show. Psycho wannabe. Let's never meet again. This happened 4 years ago. I had just graduated from high school and was a month and a half into summer break. Needing money for college, I began working full-time for the school district I had just graduated from. Due to a music festival I wanted to attend, as well as monetary concerns, I did not go with my family to North Carolina, which was fine by me. What 18-year-old doesn't want a house to themselves for a week? Furthermore, my parents' house is out in the country, so I have little to no fear about my neighbors complaining about parties or being bothered in any way whatsoever. But I was wrong. I often take the back roads from my friend's house, but on that night, I decided I wanted some McDonald's. So I took the main drag and came home on a different route. This way takes you past the mechanic shop, and I noticed a car's lights turning on, or should I say, light, for this car had only one headlight working. I remember thinking that it was strange that this car all of a sudden turned its lights on as I was passing, and began to become even more concerned when it pulled out behind me. But I tend to be paranoid by nature. Nothing serious, but I always question if the person behind me is following me, and whether they mean to harm me. So I brushed it off as an unfortunate coincidence. But as I neared my street, and the car was still tailing me, I started to become freaked out. I looked at my gas tank, and my heart sunk, as I saw I was on empty. Either I pulled onto my street and go home, or I risk driving around some and seeing if this dude follows. Yet that option held the risk of my car running out of gas and leaving me stranded on the road, and I figured I'd rather take my chances on my own soil than on the side of some dark, lonely country backroad. So I turned onto my street, only to have my heart sink when the one headlamped car makes the turn right behind me. At this point I know I'm screwed. With nothing left to do, I begin pulling up my driveway. It's a hill about 100 yards long, and to my utter horror, they begin to follow me up. Looking back, I should have called the cops, but there's no lost love between law enforcement and myself, and at the time I was too caught up to even consider calling them. If my family would have been home, this would have never happened. I would have called my dad, and he would have grabbed his gun, but he, along with the rest of my family, were gone, 12 hours away and at the beach. So when they began to drive up my driveway after me, I stopped and put my car in reverse. They responded by reversing too, and yet they stopped at the bottom, effectively blocking my driveway. At this point, I pulled forward again, only to have the same jig and dance happen. They followed, I reversed, they reversed, and sat on the end, blocking my escape. I quickly pulled up and turned my car around to come at them head on. By this time they were halfway up my driveway, the furthest they had ever come. Looking back, I was terrified, alone, and angry. Who did this person think they were, with my brights on and shining right back into their face? I opened my car door, got out, pulled out my pocket knife, and grasped it into my left hand while I grabbed my hammer into my right. I used to keep one between my seat and door. In some weird, desperate mindset, I had made a split-second decision to grab the hammer from the hand with the handle sticking out. My hope was that it would be mistaken as a gun. I began yelling and pointing my hammer/gun at the car while screaming at them to get the hell out. And what do you want? All the time I held my hammer as a gun and prayed that they would fall for it. Whether they did or not, I cannot say. Part of me believes they thought it was a gun due to my brights being held while making my whole front side a shadow. Yet they could have just not wanted a fight. Perhaps they thought I was a girl, or was timid, and wouldn't reset so aggressively and violently. Who knows, but it worked. They slowly backed out of my driveway and crept around the cul-de-sac. As they were leaving my street, I ran after them, hiding behind my neighbor's house. And at every driveway, the car would slow down to near stop, as if scoping out the houses. Thankfully, they didn't pull into any driveways, and they turned off my street altogether. After I was safely in my house, I ate McDonald's by the front window with all my lights turned off, waiting to see if the creeps would come back. Thankfully, they did not. But that night, I locked every door in the house, which I have always done anyway, and slept with a hammer, machete, and baseball bat next to me, and pocket knife under the pillow. Complete overkill, I know, but I was terrified. Now I know where my dad keeps his guns, so if it ever happens again, I'll be better prepared. This happened about 2 months ago, when my parents went away for the weekend, leaving me and my pets to look after the house. Usually I'm very nervous to be home alone overnights, because I'm a weak 18-year-old girl who happens to have a few enemies in town. There are teenagers who have assaulted and threatened me, and things like that. So of course, when I'm alone, I get paranoid. My parents decided to leave on Thursday night, which usually went uneventfully. So did Friday night. Finally, Saturday night rolls around, and I'm playing some games with my friends. It's 2 a.m, and my dog is asleep behind me. All the doors are locked, lights are off, and I'm feeling good. Until I hear something outside. It starts quiet, but gradually gets louder and louder. Eventually I realize that there's someone outside my house, yelling. Usually I wouldn't care. It's Saturday night, and people walk down my road all the time when they're drunk. Except perhaps 5 minutes past this time, and this person has gone nowhere. I sneak up to my window, and lift the blind up just enough to peek out the window. And there he is, a fully grown man who I recognize, and later found out is someone my family know, looking directly at my window with the most terrifying angry look on his face. He stood in the doorway, in my driveway facing the house, yelling for 10 minutes. I'm a defenseless girl, and he's getting close to my house and getting increasingly more angry. I should have phoned the police, but I didn't know what to do. I rang my sister, and with my heart pounding and hands shaking, I told her what was going on. Luckily for me, she was calm about it, and asked me to shut the blind and listen to see if he would leave. I couldn't make out the words, but he kept going on for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I couldn't hear him. but I heard something smash. I was still on the phone, and I told my sister that I swear I heard something smash, and I was scared it was a window or something. My dog is deaf, by the way, so he was unaware of this whole thing. My sister tells me to go downstairs and check, so I turn on my flashlight on my phone and I slowly make my way downstairs. I'm basically ready to see this dude in my house and get killed or worse. But I check the windows and they're all fine. The doors are all locked and I don't see him in the peephole. My sister then tells me she can hear him around the house. She has 2 disabled kids, so I was literally shitting myself thinking he was going to try and break in. I asked her if I should call the police, but then she heard him leave, and we didn't hear him for all the rest of the night. I found out the next day that there was a bottle smashed outside, and that's what the noise was. Even if this might have seemed like a harmless drunk, me being home alone that night makes this terrifying. And if I hadn't have closed my blinds and basically hidden until he left, I don't know what he could have been capable of. I haven't told my parents who we think he was, because he lives close, and I know for a fact my parents would kill him. Even so, whenever it's late at night, and I hear a drunk man's voice outside my house, I always fear the worst. Years ago, when I was in grade school, now I'm 22, my parents one Monday morning finally felt confident in allowing me to come home from school by myself and stay home without a babysitter until they arrived as well. That morning, my father gave me the house key, showed me the emergency numbers in the yellow book, and gave me instructions on what to do if stupid things happened, like the house catching on fire. After school that day, I came home, put the key in the door, and walked into my open house. I felt free, and I felt privileged that I was finally a big boy, and that I could now be home on my own. Needless to say, I kind of got caught up in the moment, and ate tons of ice cream while watching Terminator on VHS, since my parents would never let me watch anything over PG-13. Around 5 that day, I heard the doorbell ring. My dad told me to never answer the door by myself, even if they were home. I walked to our family room, where I could get a good view of who was there. Maybe my dad was getting a package or something. He did always enjoy ordering things online. And I saw a middle-aged man standing in a dark black jacket that I've never seen before. He rang the doorbell again, and I expected him to leave after receiving no answer. After a 3rd ring, I saw him walk down the steps and assumed he was leaving. I went back to watching Terminator when I noticed something outside my kitchen window. The man was walking in our backyard for some odd reason. I felt scared for my life, since some stranger was on our property. I ran under the kitchen table and grabbed the cordless phone from the counter and proceeded to call my dad's work number. He answered, and I exclaimed how some strange man was in the backyard and was now proceeding to try and open our sliding door. My dad told me to stay where I was and call the neighbors. He would call 911. I told my dad I loved him, and he said that he would call me immediately after he dialed 911. Before I could call my neighbors, the man was able to somehow open our family room window. I feared for my life and ran to the bathroom and locked the door and called our neighbors. After about 30 seconds, I heard my neighbor running through our house, shouting my name to see if I was okay. She said how she saw no one in the house, and we stayed in the bathroom until the police arrived. The police conducted their investigation and told us they found some fingerprints that matched a recently released criminal who was previously put in jail for breaking into homes. After that day, my parents did not leave me without a babysitter until I went to high school. Every week, I wonder what happened. Did he run when he saw someone was in the house? Did my neighbor scare him away if he heard her yelling? Needless to say, after that day, and even after I was allowed to stay home without a babysitter, I never stayed home alone. I was either at a friend's house or an after-school program until my parents came to pick me up. I still feel unsafe home alone. This happened back when I was in 5th grade. I had just realised I had forgotten to make cookies for my school's bake sale, and it was the night before. My mum was naturally irked that I'd forgotten, but, as mums do, she helped me make some snickerdoodles. So we get to baking, and everything went a-okay until we didn't have enough eggs or sugar. Of course, my mum is not happy. It's 8 p.m, and she reluctantly grabbed her keys and hopped into the car. My sister was already in bed, and my mum said she could trust me to be home alone for the first time. Not even 10 minutes after she left, I heard a tapping on our front porch. This was the creepiest, slowest tap you could ever imagine. I thought it was a bird or at worst a raccoon, but it was so methodical. This went on for 5 minutes. I curled up in the fetal position and rocked back and forth while waiting for it to stop. I eventually gathered the courage to take a peek outside the window. When I raised the blinds, I saw a man's face illuminated by my porch light. As soon as I opened the blinds, his eyes shot straight to the window, staring right at me. He smiled. I ran into my sister's room, locked the door and turned on the light. She woke up and started crying. To get her to stop, I read her the story. All the while, I had the tapping coming from our front door. When my mum pulled up, the tapping stopped. I went to my aunt and uncle's house on a family vacation 10 years ago. We drove from South Texas to some small town in Missouri. I can't remember the name. We arrived at 1 a.m. The family consisted of myself, 2 younger sisters, mother and father. Most of the family was hungry from the long drive and wanted to see if a McDonald's was open. I was so tired from the long car ride and wanted to stay at the house. Mum said one of my sisters would be staying as well. I settled down into the living room watching TV, slightly dozing off, and I can remember hearing the pitter-patter down the hallway, and I assumed it was my sister just running around. She'd been eating sugary snacks the whole way up, and I get a call from my mum asking what I wanted to eat, and in the background, I can hear both my sisters arguing. I hear a giggle somewhere behind me, stand up, look around, and there's nothing. I asked my mum if my sister ended up going with them, which she confirmed. I stood in the corner of the room until she got back. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I put out a little 5-minute poll just to see if anyone wanted alien stories. It was more of a joke than anything. But I do plan on doing it in future, so yeah. But guys, alien stories would be great. I know you'll like them. So please tune in when I do them. I'll probably make it extra long to compensate. I think it'll be a lot of fun. Maybe I'll mix up some other stuff in there too, just to make it even more appealing. Don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you're new and press the bell icon for more stories every night. If you want to send me a story, send it to my Reddit or my email found in the description. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.